A haunting guitar melody pierced the silence of the quiet Los Angeles suburbs. Jake froze mid-step on the staircase, ears tuned to the unfamiliar tune. It was unlike anything he usually heard. Heavy, fragmented, almost like a muffled cry woven into every note. His eyes flicked upstairs toward the source of the sound. Emily's room. Emily. Just hearing her name stirred unease within him. She had moved in only yesterday, her presence disrupting the predictable rhythm of the household. Jake recalled her arrival vividly, stepping out of a sleek, expensive car, exuding an air of cool detachment. Her sharp, unapologetic gaze had brushed over him briefly, making him feel invisible in his own home. But now her music drew him in, pulling him toward her room. Jake ascended the stairs cautiously, his steps deliberately light as though fearing the music might vanish if he hurried. The melody grew louder, swelling with raw emotion, and just as he reached her door, it suddenly stopped. The house seemed to hold its breath. Before he could decide whether to knock, her voice cut through the silence, smooth, tinged with sarcasm. Jake flinched. The door swung open, revealing Emily with piercing blue eyes that glowed under the soft light of her room. Her casual style, brown hair falling loosely over her shoulders, and an oversized Van t-shirt he didn't recognize, added to her effortless, untamed presence. Her sharp gaze locked onto him, cutting and cold. "I wasn't eavesdropping," Jake stammered, heat rushing to his face. "It's just—" Jake leaned against the wall, watching as Emily smirked without warmth. "Your guitar sounds nice," he said, his voice hesitant. Emily raised an eyebrow, tilting her head as if examining a puzzle she had no interest in solving. "Nice, not exactly glowing praise," she replied dryly. She studied him for a moment longer before adding, "Jake, right? The quiet guy who lives here." Jake pressed his lips together, swallowing the sting of her words. "Yeah," he mumbled, barely audible. Emily crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Interesting. You don't strike me as the type to care about music. You seem closed off." Her words pricked at his pride, but Jake stayed composed. "I'm just curious. Your music feels emotional." For a split second, something flickered in Emily's eyes, something softer, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Maybe," she said, glancing away. "But emotions aren't something I share easily." She turned and disappeared back into her room, closing the door before he could respond. Moments later, the sound of her guitar filled the air again, this time fierce and stormy, like a tempest breaking loose. Jake stood frozen, his mind churning. Her confidence was sharp, almost impenetrable, yet her music felt raw, almost broken. Why was she so burdened? How could someone so strong create melodies that carried so much pain? Returning to his room, the haunting sound of her guitar followed him like a shadow. It wasn't just music, it was something deeper. A warning. A mystery, and though he didn't want to admit it, Emily had left him unsettled, stirring something inside him. Was it curiosity? Or something harder to define, something closer to longing? Jake couldn't sleep that night. The sound of Emily's guitar lingered in his mind, every note etched deep within him. Lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, he felt a restlessness he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the way Emily carried herself with defiant confidence, but the haunting cry hidden within her music. Each chord seemed to mask a plea for help. The next morning, Jake came down to the kitchen earlier than usual. Emily was already there, seated at the table with a coffee cup in hand, her fingers tapping to a rhythm only she could hear as she stared out the window. For the first time, Jake noticed a shift in her demeanor. The usual indifference she carried was replaced by a quiet sadness that the soft morning light betrayed. "Morning," Jake said, breaking the silence. Emily turned, her piercing blue eyes meeting his. "Morning," she replied curtly, her hoarse voice heavy with exhaustion. Jake sat across from her, clutching his coffee cup like it could keep him grounded. The silence between them wasn't tense, but it was weighed down by things left unsaid. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice careful and curious. "Your guitar last night, it was good." Emily gave a short laugh, though it held no joy. "Good," she said, the word lingering like an unfinished thought. "Do you really understand?" Jake frowned, unsure. "What do you mean?" he asked. Emily took a sip of her coffee, her gaze meeting his before drifting far away. "My music, it's not just for fun. It's how I escape. But no matter how much I play, reality's always there, waiting for me." Jake felt the weight of her words, but struggled to respond. She carried something heavy, something trapped. He could sense it, but not name it. Her voice cut through his thoughts. "Do you ever feel like you don't belong?" she asked, quiet yet piercing. Jake hesitated, her question striking a nerve he rarely acknowledged. "Yeah," he admitted softly. "All the time." Emily's smirk wasn't mocking, but weary, resigned. "At least we have that in common," she murmured, standing to take her empty cup to the sink. Jake watched her, the confidence in her movements masking a loneliness he could feel but couldn't fully understand. Unable to hold back, he blurted, "Why do you feel that way?" She froze, clutching the cup, her voice turning cold. "This place, this house, this life, it's all an arrangement. My mom didn't marry your dad for love. She married him for stability, someone to carry what she couldn't. And me, I'm just the baggage she brought along." Her bluntness shattered the fragile illusion of harmony his father had tried so hard to maintain. Jake's throat tightened as he struggled with her brutally honest words. Emily turned to him, her sharp gaze softening into something hollow. "Do you ever feel like you're just a piece in someone else's game?" she asked quietly. Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. Emily nodded as though she already knew his thoughts. Without another word, she left the kitchen, leaving Jake alone with a storm of emotions swirling inside him. The morning sunlight streamed over the backyard as a question lingered in Jake's mind. Who was Emily really? He felt an irresistible urge to uncover her truth, as if understanding her was a task he couldn't avoid. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an unforeseen connection. That afternoon, the house felt unnervingly quiet. Jake sat on the sofa, staring at the TV, though his mind was elsewhere. His dad and stepmother were out for dinner, leaving only him and Emily in the house. He was accustomed to evenings like this. His dad was always busy, and his stepmother rarely slowed down. But Emily's presence changed everything, charging the air with a tension he couldn't quite decipher. From the stairs, he heard her steps, slow and deliberate. Though he didn't turn around, he sensed her entering the living room. She sat in the chair opposite him, her loose brown hair framing her face, a glass of red wine in her hand. Emily carried an aura that felt distant and untouchable, as if she belonged in a world far removed from his own. "Do you always watch TV like this?" "Looks mind-numbingly boring," she teased, her tone light yet layered with something Jake couldn't pinpoint. "Just killing time," Jake said with a shrug, trying to mask his unease. Emily smirked, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She sipped her wine and glanced at the screen before directing her gaze back at him. "Killing time? Fascinating. Don't you have anything better to do?" Her words cut, but Jake stayed quiet, unsure how to respond. His silence seemed to spur her on. "Are you always like this?" she pressed, tilting her head and narrowing her eyes, studying him. "Hiding from everything?" Jake frowned, turning to face her. "And you? Are you always trying to provoke people?" Emily's laughter came more naturally this time. She set her glass on the coffee table and leaned back, crossing her arms. "Maybe, but at least I'm honest about it." They fell silent, though the air was thick with tension, like a string pulled tight, ready to snap. Jake tried to focus on the television, but Emily's gaze burned into him, making it impossible to concentrate. Finally, he broke. "What do you really want?" Jake asked, his voice low but firm. Emily leaned forward slightly, her eyes glinting with something he couldn't decipher. "I don't want anything," she murmured, her tone unreadable. "Just curious about you," Jake scoffed lightly. Emily met his gaze, her eyes piercing through the carefully constructed walls he'd spent years building. "Maybe it's because you keep hiding," she said after a beat. "You make me want to figure out who you really are." Jake's chest tightened. He wasn't used to anyone looking at him like that, so direct, so unrelenting. Before he could find the words to respond, Emily stood, glass of wine in hand. "Don't worry," she said softly, though her tone carried a hint of challenge. "I'm not expecting an answer." She walked out of the room, leaving him overwhelmed and uncertain. Something inside him refused to let her leave like that. Almost instinctively, he followed her to the backyard. Emily stood under the faint glow of the patio light, her gaze fixed on the dark sky. Jake stopped a few feet away, not daring to step closer, but unable to retreat. "Why did you follow me out here?" she asked, her voice gentler now, catching him off guard. Jake hesitated. "I don't know," he finally said. Emily turned to face him, her blue eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You don't know? That's strange. I thought you always knew what you wanted." He exhaled a dry laugh. "And you? Do you always know what you want?" She took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. "Maybe I do. Or maybe I'm still figuring it out." They stood in charged silence, eyes locked. Jake couldn't tell who moved first, but suddenly Emily was so close, he could feel her breath. "Have you ever thought," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "that some things, even if they're wrong, are still worth trying?" Before Jake could respond, Emily leaned in, her lips brushing his in a fleeting kiss. It was light and swift, but it sparked something he couldn't ignore. When she pulled back, her eyes shimmered with an unreadable emotion. Sadness, perhaps, or something far more complicated. "We both know this is a mistake," she said softly, holding his gaze. "But who cares?" With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jake standing in the night, his heart racing and his mind in turmoil. Jake knew this moment would stay with him forever. The kiss in the garden had changed everything. Now whenever his eyes met Emily's, it felt as though time stalled. The memory of their kiss lingered, heavy and unspoken, filling every corner of the house with tension. But it wasn't just between Jake and Emily. Ryan, Jake's best friend, had noticed something was off. Naturally observant, Ryan couldn't ignore Jake's increasingly strange behavior. Jake, normally reserved, now avoided Ryan's gaze altogether whenever Emily was around. Emily, on the other hand, remained her usual self, confident and casual, but Ryan caught the fleeting glances she'd steal at Jake when she thought no one was looking. Everything came to a head on Friday night. Jake, Emily, Ryan, and a few others were at a campus bar, unwinding after the week. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, but Jake barely noticed. All he could feel was Emily's presence at the far end of the table. She wore a simple black dress, casually elegant, and every time she laughed, Jake found himself sneaking glances. Ryan, seated beside him, noticed. When Emily got up to grab another drink, Ryan leaned closer to Jake. "What's going on with you and her?" he asked with a half smile, though his tone betrayed concern. Jake shrugged. "Nothing. She's just hard to figure out." Ryan frowned, unconvinced. After a moment, he added quietly, "You know, I used to think I liked her. But now, I don't know. She's different." "Don't you think?" Jake stayed silent, his lack of response speaking louder than words. Ryan's unease grew. Later, as the night wrapped up and the group started heading home, Ryan decided to keep an eye on Jake. When Jake quietly slipped out the back of the bar into the alley, Ryan followed at a distance. Moments later, Emily appeared. Ryan froze, his heart racing, and took a cautious step closer. Ryan stayed hidden in the shadows, close enough to see. Under the dim streetlights, he caught sight of Emily and Jake standing face to face. Though he couldn't hear their words, he didn't need to. He saw Emily step closer, saw Jake remain still, and then Emily leaned in. It wasn't an innocent kiss. It was real, filled with emotion, and crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Ryan's chest tightened as he turned away abruptly, disbelief hitting him hard. Jake, his best friend, the person he trusted the most, had not only betrayed his family, but also taken away the girl Ryan had hoped to have a chance with. The storm of emotions inside him was overwhelming. The next day, Ryan confronted Jake on the empty basketball court after class. His arms crossed, his expression was heavy with anger and disappointment. Jake didn't need any explanation. He could see it written all over Ryan's face. "You think I didn't see?" Ryan said, his voice simmering with restrained fury. "I saw you with Emily last night." Jake froze, words failing him. "What the hell were you thinking, Jake?" Ryan's voice rose. "She's your stepsister, your family. And you kissed her. How could you do this?" Jake, cornered, muttered, "Ryan, it's not as simple as you think." "Not simple." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Then explain it to me. Did you even think about your dad? Your family? You think I don't know that?" Jake snapped, his voice breaking. "I know it's wrong. I know how bad this is. But I can't stop. I just can't." Ryan stood silent for a moment, his anger giving way to disappointment. "Jake," he said quietly, his voice strained, "this isn't just about you and Emily. This will destroy your family. And if you don't stop, I can't promise to stay silent." Jake watched as Ryan walked away, leaving him with the crushing weight of his words. Deep down, Jake knew Ryan was right. But what he didn't know was how to walk away from Emily, because no matter how wrong it was, every time he saw her, it felt impossible to let go. Jake sat on the edge of his bed, the house cold and silent, a stark contrast to the warmth it once held. The confrontation with Ryan replayed in his mind, a painful loop he couldn't escape. Emily, the person who made him feel alive, was also the source of his torment. Ryan's betrayal and his father's unforgiving expectations only compounded the weight Jake carried. It felt suffocating. A soft knock broke the stillness. Emily stood in the doorway, her piercing blue eyes now filled with sadness. "We need to talk," she said quietly. She sat beside Jake, the silence between them heavy with unspoken truths, until she finally broke it. "I know things are slipping out of control. We can't keep doing this." Jake grabbed her hands, desperation in his voice. "I don't want to lose you." Emily's eyes shimmered with tears. "Do you think I want to? But this isn't just about us. Our families, they'd never look at us the same." Jake couldn't deny it. His silence said it all. Emily stood, her gaze distant as she stared out the window. "I've thought about all the ways we could make this work, but we can't. Not now." He moved closer, his voice breaking. "If you leave, I won't survive. I need you." Emily turned to him, her hand gently resting on his cheek. "You're stronger than you think, Jake. Sometimes loving someone means letting them go, for both your sakes." The next day, Emily left for New York, her mother offering a simple explanation about continuing her studies. No one said much, but Jake knew the truth. Watching her leave, he felt something vital inside him shatter. Weeks passed and life pretended to return to normal. But every time he passed the balcony where Emily once played her guitar, he paused, the echoes of her melody lingering. Jake realized that maybe Emily was right. Perhaps they'd find their way back to each other one day. But for now, all he could do was keep moving forward, carrying the weight of her absence while knowing she carried a piece of him too.